Hi everyone, this is Jim. Welcome to this postmortem of my Blitz game number 765. And the white pieces and started off with knight f3, hoping to get to a reti opening. And my opponent played c5 and kind of steered the game into English channels. Although it was interesting, after c5, I have the option to play e4 here. We could just go into a Sicilian. So this is another way to get into a Sicilian. Kind of funny. But anyway, like I said, I had the idea on a reti setup, so I went with g3. Now we went with e6. And, well, I didn't see anything better here. Well, I mean, I shouldn't say better. I can always play d4 and get to more of a queen's pawn type of opening. But, well, the English opening is kind of closely related to the reti, so we get into pretty much English setup here. Let's see, he goes knight c6, I go knight c3. And then he goes a6. This is the first kind of unusual move. We're out of the opening book here. I think if black just continues the knight f6, we get a very typical kind of position, bishop g2 and d5, you know, making use of that e6 pawn. Black builds up a big center here. And this is a pretty standard English type position, it looks like to me. So black played it in a bit of an unusual way with this a6 move. And the chess engine doesn't really prove. It starts to give white a pretty big advantage at this point. And we're also out of the opening book, so we can just look at the notation page here. So up to this point, before a6, white had maybe a slight opening edge, but nothing great. Now the engine starts to really like white's position. Maybe black's setup is just a little slow. Although it's kind of like the Khan Sicilian, but I haven't gone into a Sicilian. But like many of these slow setups, it can be hard to break down. So the engine evaluation should be taken with a grain of salt. And this h5 move was kind of interesting too. I really wasn't sure what to play here, but it didn't seem right to allow him to get a lot of play against my king here. And so I thought the best way to stop it was h4. And yeah, checking it out with the chess engine, it seems like h4 was one of the top moves. So I think I was doing okay to play this. It has strengths and weaknesses. It gives up this square, but it stops that pawn from coming forward. And you know, black will have to prove that he can get something going on the king's side. Let's see, he continues with knight f6. I go with d4, takes. And I wasn't really afraid of this opening. I was thinking I have a slight edge in development due to the many pawn moves that black has made. He hasn't castled, he hasn't developed his bishops. I still need to castle and develop one piece, but my development is a little better here. So he goes queen c7, and I go b3. b3 was maybe a bit of a slow move. It gives away some of my advantage. The chess engine would either play bishop g5 right away, or there's this other line which is interesting, kind of shows some ideas here. If you castle first, it gives d6 as a black move, which seems kind of logical. Black wants to have some control of the center, so maybe going for a hedgehog-like setup. Now bishop g5, bishop e7, and then taking. And taking back. And that was one of the things that I was wondering about, was whether it was ever useful to take off that knight, particularly when this bishop is pointing at the c6 square. And so he's forced to take back with a pawn. And you can see that here it's really served a purpose. So with this sequence of moves, white has got all of his pieces developed, and the c-pawn is no longer under fire because this b-pawn that got promoted to a c-pawn is blocking the queen. So I didn't have to waste a move defending that pawn in that sequence. So that's why that's the most accurate sequence there. So b3. Not the most precise, but still keeping an edge for white. So white is still doing fine. Here he goes bishop c5. So I defend like this, and he goes b6. I castle now, so get castled. He goes bishop b7, so he's preparing to castle. He can castle on either side. It turns out in the game, I think he castled queen side, but really at this point he could go either way. And I went knight a4. I think this is an interesting move and not bad. And now things start to heat up. He takes off this knight, and this is not this is still fine for white. It's just my next move is a mistake. I should just do the normal recapture here. And I get a good position out of this. Let's see, he can trade off this bishop. And then play queen b7 check. But at some point he has to reposition his bishop. And, well, we have a identical piece configuration in the sense that we have the same number of bishops and rooks and the same color bishops, rooks, and knights, and the same color bishops. I just have a little more space in the center. This knight is a bit out of play, but it'll take a while to come around and get into the game. But he doesn't have any immediate attack going either, and he still hasn't castled. So slight edge to white in this position, at least according to the chess engine. So that would be normal play from here. I tried, I saw that, and I was just trying to grab this bishop. I thought it'd be nice if I could get rid of this bishop, which would be nice if it worked, but it doesn't work. He has a very clever sequence here, and so I have to say Black played this part of the game pretty well. His only weak move so far was this a6 move on move 4. The other moves since then have been logical and good moves. And he plays the next couple moves very strongly. So he takes off the bishop and he throws in the check. And what I didn't see is that this makes my life difficult. I had calculated that we'd get a position something like this. And I have a piece that's hanging, but he has a piece that's hanging, and otherwise the material is even. But the problem now is that this check has kind of activated his knight in a way. So for example, if I just move my king to either of those two dark squares, he can play knight f3 check, and so save his knight, and at the same time my knight is still under attack. So things are looking pretty bad, and even if I move my king back to try and counterattack his knight, he can play all these discovered checks against my king. Things just fall apart. And let's see, the one square I could go to avoid that kind of scenario. I didn't really think about this during the game, but I looked at it later with the chess engine, is I could play this king h3 move. But after knight f3, and if I try to save my knight by playing something like that, he actually has a winning attack with g5. So the engine is giving Black a +5 score in this position. So basically my game is just falling apart here. So the best move for me is actually to play this move f3, which I thought about during the game. This is the move I considered, and it was my first choice. And in fact, it is the best move, but it loses, really. It just loses a pawn, but I have to take back with the queen, and he can keep trading and then take my knight, and he's a pawn up, and we're into an endgame, and my bishop is not yet developed. I guess the bishop looks a bit like a sad piece now because it's blocked by the pawn. I probably will be able to push that pawn forward, or will I? Let's see, whose move is in this position? He just played b takes c5. Yeah, I'll be able to push that pawn forward and develop the bishop. That'll be a pawn down in an endgame. I actually ended up in a pawn down endgame anyway, and so that's probably the best. Well, it is definitely the best I can hope for, because the move I played, I didn't like that going into a pawn down endgame, and I tried for something a little better with this move e4, but this just doesn't work at all, and it fails in a pretty simple way. So my opponent, who's been playing pretty well up to this point, really fails to take advantage of his situation. He just doesn't play the best move here. And the best move is pretty simple. It's just take my pawn with a knight. And, take my knight with a pawn. That defends his knight, so he's just a piece up. And I have nothing here. So this is pretty horrible. Let's see. The line I was thinking about during the game, if you heard me talking, I was thinking about queen takes c5 with the same idea. He just takes my knight and defends his knight. Thought maybe I could get some, pressure with this pin, but he can defend the knight this way, and he stays a pawn up. He stays a piece up. So this is all good for Black. Instead, he played this move, knight takes e4, which you know, superficially looks very good. It looks like a strong move. Has the appearance of a strong move, but well, I have ways to deal with that threat. You know, it is setting up this discovered attack on my king, and sometimes those things can be very dangerous. But I can just take his knight here, and it turns out that that he doesn't have any great discovered checks. So just you know, it's something that looks good, but you have to calculate a little further ahead to find that it's not actually the best line there. You could simply be a piece up rather than playing a tricky move that doesn't quite work. Anyway, technically my best move here is knight takes e4. This is a bit hard to see, but you know, actually there was a sequence of like 4 blunders in a row if you ask the chess engine. But it was a little hard to find this move, so I don't really count this one. The point of this is that after the queen takes, I can throw in this move f3 and force the queen to move, and the queen doesn't have a good square to go to that defends the knight. So that's the point you had to see. And then there's this other neat point, which is if the queen checks, you know, that's how you know, black can escape and keep the material advantage. But if the queen checks here, then I can take and then play bishop b2, and the knight is trapped. The knight has no squares to go to. So kind of amazing. That actually is winning for me. So black keeps the edge, but has to play a bit more carefully. Let's see. Queen takes e4 with check. I think that's pretty logical. f3, and then he has to play this check, queen c2 check. And then after this exchange, let's say I have to move my rook. His knight can escape, and he stays a pawn up, and so he's winning. Let's see. I played this queen takes d4, so that was this move is not quite as good because of this line. Another blunder. He didn't play the best move here, although like the previous one, these blunders were a little bit harder to see. He could have taken with the pawn here and made things difficult for my queen. I can't take the knight, it's still protected, and I have to be careful where I put my queen so that I don't fall victim to any discovered attacks. So I can take this pawn, queen takes g7, so probably he didn't want to allow that. But he has this clever move, rook h7, and I can't take the rook because you know, some discovered check with the knight will win the queen. So my queen has to retreat. Let's see, and then he can play knight d2 check, and I can block the check, and then he can take the rook and win the exchange here. So let's see, I don't have to take the knight right away. I can play like this with the bishop and then scoop up the knight with my rook, keep more pawns on the board. Anyway, that is, let's see, knight takes g3, king takes. He gets an extra pawn this way compared to the line that was actually played. So that's why this immediate knight takes c5, which is pretty naturally takes the knight with check, is technically a blunder. Let's see. So I move my king to g1, and after the smoke is cleared here, you know, he's just a pawn up, and I don't have enough compensation. Although he starts to make things easy for me with castling queenside. He should just castle kingside here, protecting his pawns over here. And then, you know, he can still continue the attack. He doesn't have to worry that his king is over here. He just needs to bring his rooks to the center and push these pawns forward, and he will have a very good game here. Instead, he castled to the queen side, and, well, this starts to give me some hope. So it was interesting. He played really well up to a certain point, and then he just was moving too quickly, I think, during this part. He just wasn't pausing to look for those moves that would really finish the game, and eventually this got him into trouble, although not without further adventure. So there's one really interesting sequence coming up. I grabbed this pawn here, although the chess engine prefers just to chase the knight with b4 instead. You know, I'm still about even after he castled queenside. So, but I grabbed the pawn, and he brought his rook over to chase my queen, and I grabbed another pawn, and that second pawn was probably not smart. I should just drop my queen back to b2 and defend things here. So yeah, these things can be a little hard to judge. Let's see. Oh, we played rook h2, g8. Let's see. And I played queen takes f7. That's right. And now he could have played this move, rook d. to f8, and this gives him an edge. It gives up another pawn, but now his knight starts to get active, and he has threats against g3 here. I retreat my queen. He's got knight takes g3, and he's actually breaking through here. He's got a winning attack at this point. So I have to give back some material to survive this. So that would have been the way he should have played that. H to g1. So instead of queen takes f7, I should have just retreated my queen to b2. And then instead of harassing my queen and giving up another pawn and going for the attack, he went for the attack this way, which is sometimes an interesting idea. He's going to double on the g file and maybe threaten to take the h pawn. But anyway, just not the best move in this case. So I went bishop to e3, get my bishop off the back rank, connect my rooks, and try to hold on against this attack. Went rook d to g8, which is correct, and then, but I still have the edge here. But I make one last blunder. This is my final blunder of the game. So this is a little tactics quiz for you guys. Can you spot the winning combination for black here? Okay, pause the video if you want time to think about it. I am going to give the answer away now. It's the rook sacrifice. Just sacrifice that rook. Who needs it when you've got mating threats? I can't take the rook because the queen and rook are coordinating on this square, and that's checkmate. But I can't go anywhere either. If I move my king, then rook here will also be checkmate. And the only square I can move my king to is here. So that was just a mate in two. and I allowed that. So I needed to play the move bishop to g5 here, and I am actually better in this position because I'm actually threatening to take his rook now, and Chess Engine recommends giving up the exchange here. so king h2 gives the game away, and then knight e4. It was not the right way to continue, and after rook g1, defending on g3, defending the g2 square, and this is still defended, so the sacrifices no longer work. So I have a one game from this point out, and fortunately for me, I don't make any other huge blunders. Let's see. It's funny, the material is still even. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 1, 2, 3. Oh no, I'm a pawn up. I guess that's why. I mean, you know, he still has some attacking chances, it looks like, so I wouldn't necessarily be considering resigning at this point, but he can't really get anything going. I have ways to bring all of my pieces in. I was glad I found this move. I was about to play some weaker move, and then I realized I need to get my pieces into the game and also get some counterattack going. So you know, this is threatening on E or D7 there. Let's see. So we went for the pawn there, so he gets a pawn. I can't take it, but I can walk away from that. Yeah, he'd established this pin, and his queen is still hanging all this time. So eventually, now he's got two pieces. Oh no, that's not hanging just yet, but eventually he needs to move the queen. Sets up another discovered attack here, but well, I can take this rook with check after he plays queen c6. Let's see, and then I move my king to f1. I've walked my king away from all the various threats, and so I'm safe, and his rook is still hanging. He played rook to g4, and I just played queen to f7, and I'm taking a look at this pawn. Plus, I'm a rook up at this point, so this is a pretty straightforward win, and he resigned. Anyway, it was an interesting game with a lot of tactics, a long series of mistakes in the middle. I think, yeah, I have to criticize my opponent for not taking the time at the right moments to really finish me off. He had a couple of chances where he really could have ended that game in his favor, and he just didn't take advantage of it. Okay, well, I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you again soon.